Hey everyone, Travis here. I know a lot of people have been discussing the LMQ drama, basically this big battle over who's actually the team owner. A lot of things have come out since I put out the article. So essentially, LMQ joined America. They've joined up in America, and they came over under the ownership of a company. This is really important. A company called Tianxi. The company owned Royal Club at the time as well, a Chinese team. So this company owned both. There wasn't any issue there because LMQ was not into the LCS, so no problems with any rule set stuff, right? Now this is where it gets a little kind of confusing. Around this time, Sharon Lee, who is the general manager for LMQ, she's the person that you've seen in a lot of the interviews that I've done as a translator, and she's been helping to run things on the team, makes a Twitter post saying that they're now owned by an American organization. Basically, the American organization she was referring to was A&K Esports, which is a company that owns LawClass. So LawClass is the website. They sponsor a ton of different teams in the LCS, but basically you can go take lessons from pro players, and they sponsor CLG and Curse and a couple others, I think Cloud9. They also sponsored LMQ. Now that's really important. These two guys that own A&K Esports and own LawClass signed their names on the forum and said that this LMQ is owned by A&K Esports, right? Now Riot did not know that A&K Esports also owned LawClass. At some point in time afterwards though, A&K Esports, the owners, approach Riot and say, hey, we would like to change our name to LawClass. Now from what I understand, they wanted to change the team name to LawClass. Somewhat unclear, but they either wanted to change the company or the team name to LawClass. And that's when Riot's like, hey, wait a second. LawClass, that is that company that sponsors a bunch of other teams in the LCS. And you signed a contract with us that said that you did not own or have any financial interest or any kind of connection to any of these other teams in the LCS. You violated Rule 3.1 of the LCS regulations. You cannot. You have two options at this point. Now that we found this out, we can either have you drop your ownership of LMQ, sell it to somebody else, get rid of it, or you can drop your sponsorships of these other teams. Now, LawClass is built around these sponsorships with other teams because they want other players to be doing this, so they essentially have to give up their whole LawClass business to do this. So they opted, hey, you know what, we're going to sell LMQ, no worries. But the concern is that we are trying to get them visas through our company. It's really important that they get these visas so they can play in the US and not have to transfer back to China. That would be really bad. So Riot's like, you know what, we have the players' best interests at heart here, so get them the visas, but the moment they get the visas, you have to sell them to somebody else because we don't want you to have ownership of this team. Now, at the same time, Riot is suddenly contacted, or not at the same time, but shortly thereafter, Riot is suddenly contacted by this guy named Alex Gu, claiming to represent Tianxi. And they say, hey, I represent this company called Tianxi. We are the legitimate owners of this team, and there's a bunch of craziness going on. But this company supposedly signed an agreement. They had like a manager guy come over to the US and sign an agreement with A&K Esports. The agreement said that, hey, Tianxi owes A&K Esports no money. Basically, hey, we've got this relationship with you because you're a sponsor anyway. Can you act as our agent in the US, right? Like A&K Esports was supposed to represent Tianxi's interest in the US. That meant that Tianxi was actually the owner of LMQ. Now, what A&K Esports says is that during this contract and this agreement, Tianxi failed several of the contractual agreements, including sending money to the team. Essentially, A&K Esports is like, hey, you messed up, you voided the contract, and now we own the team. Tianxi says to A&K, no, we didn't mess up at all. We don't know what you're talking about. You've never owned this team. We've always owned the team. And in fact, we're selling the team to this new guy, this new investor, this Chinese guy, who is later, this guy ends up setting up a company called Luyu Esports, right? At this point in time, Riot starts to become aware of this conflict, right? Because you've got these two people saying, oh, we're both the managers, we're both the owners, and Riot's like, whoa, what is happening here? So recently, Riot seems to have acknowledged this last week that Tianxi was the owner. Seems as though they said, okay, all the paperwork points to this, and Tianxi is selling it to Luyu, and that's cool. Now, there's some crazy mudslinging stuff that happened after the fact. So essentially the community, seeing Sharon, the general manager who works for LMQ Esports, is dating the owner of Law Class and all this kind of thing. They have seen her in interviews and all this kind of thing, and so they saw a post that she made where she said she was really upset and she spent money on the team and all this kind of thing, and they all said Sharon is like this person who's been completely screwed over by the situation. There's this sketchy Chinese guy named Tianxi, and it's obvious that it's Sharon that is in the right here. Maybe she is, I don't know. But the community all sort of rallies around Sharon, right? So Alex Gu, who had apparently worked with LMQ the entire time and represented Tianxi, now represents the Luyu, put a story out basically saying, hey, listen, things aren't as they seem. Sharon started off as a volunteer like me, but over time she seemed to want to be more powerful within the organization and started making a lot of demands and sort of pushed me out of the way so she could be in the limelight. And there's a story about how at some point in time when the ownership dispute began, there were two men in big black shirts, and kind of described as like a bouncer type of person, who waited in a home at the LMQ house for the Tianxi and Luyu guys, like the Chinese guys, and said, hey, listen, don't mess with us, we own this team, blah, blah, blah. Shortly after this, the LMQ players start to, in sort of strange ways, corroborate this story through social media and that kind of thing. And then eventually, the coach for LMQ steps down. He basically says the team is starting to fall apart because of all these organizational issues. And he says that the players themselves didn't even want to get involved in the whole debate. They just wanted to play. And that sort of under the guidance of the Chinese companies, Tianxi or Luyu, I guess now just Luyu, right? But underneath that faction, they sort of told the players, hey, you should go post this kind of thing. And they didn't even want to get involved. So that makes now the Chinese faction look somewhat sketchy. That's where we are up until now. The things that are still to be decided are who actually completely owns the team at this time. Riot has yet to put out a statement yet that says this is the sole owner of the team, or this company is the sole ownership of this team. And things are still somewhat up in the air. Obviously, everyone's really concerned about the players because the coach's article said that players were having to take away time from scrims now to deal with some of this kind of thing. So hopefully it all gets resolved. This has been a really lengthy explanation, so it's still really long, but hopefully it's a little bit easier to follow than a bunch of different articles and statements. So anyway, thanks for watching. You can stay tuned for more esports coverage at ongamers.com.